welcome friends, comrades, people of Halifax and beyond to Lister Lane Cemetery. It's a real pleasure to be here. My name's Dan Whittle, I'm chair of Calderdale Trades Council, and I'm just going to kick off the proceedings for the day. I want to start by thanking everybody for turning up. It's a real honour to have everybody here, and we're going to hear in a moment from a couple of very important speakers. David, who those of you that were here early enough to listen in on his wonderful talk have just enjoyed hearing, talk about the local Chartists buried here. But David will speak momentarily, and then Madam Mayor Angie Gallagher will do the grand unveiling. But I wanted to start by saying a couple of words about why we're here, really. We're here today, of course, to remember Chartism, its legacy and its importance for today. But we're here to remember that in the context of something broader. We're here specifically today, this year, putting up this board to remember the events of 180 years ago in this town and beyond. This year marks the 180th anniversary of the Great Strike of 1842, an event where working people across the country found a voice through Chartism, but also through their trade unions, through which to oppose the inequalities and the ills of the Industrial Revolution. Their actions in 1842 give the lie to the idea that working people of this country took the ills and inequalities of the Industrial Revolution lying down. And yet, the 9 Chartists we've just seen the gravestones of, or the markings of in this fine cemetery, they're too little remembered in this town and beyond. Chartism as a movement is too little remembered, and when it is remembered, it's often misremembered. So it's important that we're here today. It's important that we've gathered such a grand crowd. It's really important that we're collaborating today. We've got trade unions involved. We've got the Friends of Lister Lane. We've worked with Calderdale Industrial Museum, the Greyston Unity Pub, and a variety of others. It's so important that this is a collaborative town-wide event that's brought such a good crowd of people out today. And as I say, it's important that we remember that history, because that history, of course, isn't just dead history, it's living history. The gravestones we've just seen, the various things we'll talk about today, they're alive in the present. And they're alive in the present because the Great Strike of 1842 is being replicated again in the circumstances around us. A year of economic crisis and political corruption. That's 1842, not this year, even though you might not necessarily be able to tell the difference. These people, their lives, their stories have resonance for us today. They matter, and they ought to be better known. And it's to that project, really, that today's events and hopefully things that will go on beyond this are committed. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce David Glover, first of all. He's chair of the Friends of Lister Lane, who's just going to say a few words. David, over to you.
Welcome everybody, to you who I haven't welcomed already, to Lister Lane Cemetery. A big thank you to all those involved in events for today, because this is very much more of an event for the community than for us at Lister Lane. However, had it not been for a very small group of people way back in the late 1990s, this cemetery might have been completely lost. So we're very thankful that we can welcome you here today, and it's in a reasonably good condition. I do want to emphasise we do need more volunteers to help us on site. If you're able to consider that, we would be most grateful. Welcome, Madam Mayor, to Lister Lane Cemetery. Lovely to see you here this morning, and you will now say a few words. I've said all I need to. Thank you.
Well, thank you, David. Welcome and good morning to everybody on this beautiful sunny day. This is not the first time I've been to Lister Lane Cemetery. The last time I was here, it was absolutely silent and down. It was just coming straight down. So I got myself changed into an overcoat and put myself a pair of Chelsea boots on. And all the afternoon and all of that visit, my husband and our driver at the time kept taking the mickey out of me and telling me I looked like Vera off television. So, it's an honour to be here and asked to unveil this new information board to the 9 Chartists buried here in Lister Lane. Chartism has a long association with West Yorkshire and the esteemed historian Dorothy Thompson, who lived in this town with her husband, Edward Thompson. Even that went as far as to call Halifax a Chartist centre. To the extent that that's the case, then only due to the hard work and organisation of the 9 people named on this board, and the countless other unnamed Halifax folk who sustained the Chartist movement in our area throughout that time. As an elected member of Calderdale Council and the honour of being Mayor of Calderdale for this year, I'm very much aware of the contemporary relevance of the Chartist demand for democratic reform. They worked to root out the corruption from politics and strove to make it easier for everyday working people to have their say in politics. These are the demands that remain just as relevant today, and there are lessons we can all learn from the Charterists buried here, who were active in their communities, places of worship, and in their workplace in how to organise for political reform. We should reflect why it is we're unveiling this board here today, this weekend. But that's because 180 years ago in 1842, Charterists like these 9 buried in Lister Lane supported the first ever general strike in a capitalist country where over 500,000 workers across 32 different countries took strike action to improve their pay and working conditions, as well as to fight for the rights of the democratic right of the Charter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, for those fine words. And it's really important that we remember that legacy, remember Chartism. And without further ado, if I can invite you, please, Madam Mayor, to do the grand unveiling of the brand new boards.
Can you look at the camera, Angie?
Okay.
And again.
Pass the parcel. And I'd just like to say before we all finish, fantastic board. Myself and Angie still are staunch union members. I was first of all Transport General Workers, then went on to Unite. But the reason I'm here now is to hand over to the volunteers and David some information that we've already gathered from the last time. It's about the guy that was at Waterloo. It's his diary, and it will match with
Mitten.
Mitten.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much.
It's his diary.
Excellent. We can enjoy looking at it. Thank you.
Come have a read.
Yeah, what we do know about 1842 is that working people's lives in Halifax at that time were particularly difficult. The almshouses in Halifax, as historian Catherine Howe has made clear in her wonderful book, Halifax 1842. Where are you, Catherine? Catherine's just over here. Catherine's book makes absolutely clear that the almshouses and the condition of the working poor in Halifax was acute, and more acute than in many other similar towns. It was renowned as a place in which working people were not treated especially well. And so we can trace a legacy, really, from this here gibbet, which was used to take the lives of anybody who'd stolen the equivalent of £8, I think it was. If you stole something equivalent to £8 or more, you were liable to losing your lives at the hands of this device. And you can imagine the number of unknown working people whose lives were taken at the hands of this machine. So it's a worthy place for us to pause, but we'll have a moment's silence in a short while. But first, I want to introduce 2 very important speakers to help us reflect in this place and to think about some of the issues that we're talking about today. First of all, we're going to hear from President of Leeds TUC, Jane Aitchison. So without further ado, can I hand over straight to Jane, please?
Thank you, comrades. Comrades, can I just tell you, I am recovering from paralysis, so please move a little bit closer and try hard to listen to what I am saying. It is absolutely fantastic to be here today to bring solidarity from Leeds Trades Union Council, just as we did, in fact, in 1842, although probably none of us are still the same ones. Although I have to say, I also bring my family here with me today, and my daughter, who is 20, we remembered in the car on the way here, her first picket line experience was in Halifax. I was on maternity leave, but I was the president of the DWP PCS section of the union, and we were on strike. And I bring her in her rocket yacht when she is a month old to Halifax. So really good to be here again. You know, 180 years ago today, men and women here organised for better pay and for a 9-hour day. And of course for real political representation. And as I reflected upon what they had gained it is hard not to realise that in 180 years since then, we have not made the gains that I am sure they thought that we would have. Because of constant greedy bosses and a wealthy elite and a political system which is hell-bent on protecting the status quo at all costs, has ensured that we have just not been able to make enough progress for working people, and so here we are again today. In fact, since 2010, brothers and sisters, just since 2010, since the Tories came to power, we have suffered the worst wage stagnation in our whole labour history. And yet during the same period, brothers and sisters, the billionaires had a collective wealth, the top 10 billionaires in Britain had a collective wealth of 47 billion in 2010. Today they have a collective wealth of 182 billion, quite some return for them. And they are not alone. It is not a tiny handful of people in Britain who are rich. 1% of British people are worth more than £3.6 million. So there are significant riches in our country. The Tories, of course, are continuing to break all the wrong records in our country. Energy prices are, we all know, although it's sweltering today, we are on the verge of a horrific energy crisis, which will put 1/3 of us into fuel poverty this winter. 1/3 of British people, unprecedented in our lifetimes. And so far, energy prices have gone up 215%, and they are not stopping. 6.7 million people are on an NHS waiting list currently, another record. And food banks, such a stain in our country. Food banks, we now have more food banks than McDonald's, and over 1 million people relying regularly on food banks in what is still the 6th richest economy in the world. But there are other records, brothers and sisters, which are being broken today too. Industrial disputes, you cannot help to notice, are absolutely everywhere. Levels of strike action are increasing dramatically, as are membership. And I am hearing stories, fantastic stories every day of increased union activity, new reps developing all the time too. We have got the posties are set to strike, the RMT of course are striking, airline staff are striking, ASLEF today are striking. Civil servants, health workers, and teachers and university staff are all currently balloting, and many, many, many more small disputes are in the offing. Amazon staff, you know, one of the most oppressed set of workers in our society, simply walked off the job in an unofficial dispute last week and got some gains out of that. The TUC are, as you would expect, discussing coordinating the strike action. To be honest, it would be almost impossible not to coordinate it because there is so much of it going on. There is a changed mood of industrial militancy. At the RMT rally, which Leeds TUC organised a couple of weeks ago, we had a good turnout, like this, bit bigger, but also people in surprising and encouraging numbers were stopping to listen and to clap. They are feeling incredibly sympathetic towards the industrial disputes that are going on. Mick Lynch, who we have heard on the TV, where we hear a lot of the same, don't we? He has really cut through to ordinary working class people, identifying their problems, which we know about, but also importantly, identifying solutions for people too. And people are starting to feel that enough really is enough. And I do not know if you saw, brothers and sisters, but the RMT and the CWU launched a campaign this week called Enough is Enough.
Yes.
And over 250,000 people have signed up already in less than a week. And over 4 million people have watched the video. It is taking off. It will be very big. We are having a rally in Leeds. I think you will have to have a rally in Halifax, definitely.
Yes.
That campaign is really important because unlike other campaigns, it is seeking to link clearly, just as they did in 1842, the industrial with the political. And my God, that is what we need, isn't it, brothers and sisters? They are calling for a real pay rise, slashed energy prices, an end to food poverty, decent homes for all, and higher taxation for the wealthiest. And my God, we've got them as well. It's not just the working people are getting angry, but also the bosses are sensing our power and are already caving in. Every day as President will see, I get reports of industrial disputes which are being settled for really quite fantastic figures of wage rises because the bosses are scared. But we have to be really careful. We must not be bought off too cheaply or too easily. The trajectory, if we do not stop this rot, is not good. I have a neighbour who works in IT, and he goes to these conferences where they model the future, yeah? And it's no good, brothers and sisters. It's not the future I want, yeah? He talks a lot about how artificial intelligence can be so good in 20 years' time that actually there would be the need for very few jobs. And also, as a consequence of that, it's not leisure time, brothers and sisters, yeah? It's unemployment, yeah? And it is wealth going into even fewer and fewer hands, which you can see is the current trajectory of billionaires. So actually, in the end, we will end up even poorer than our ancestors, which we are remembering today. This shows very clearly, though, that we have the technology, we have the power, and we have the intelligence to radically change our society for the benefit of the few or for the benefit of the many. They say that those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat its mistakes. And so I just want to finish by saying, being a real tribute to Calderdale TUC, and particularly our brother Malcolm Metcalf, I know who does a lot of work on this, and everyone who has been involved to help us to learn from those events of 180 years ago. Today we should feel inspired by the immense strength of those strikers. And not just of those strikers, but of the whole community which arose up in support, not just here, but outside of here, not having disputes about Leeds and Bradford and all the rest of it, but far, far beyond, you know, real solidarity to bring real change for their class. And I also, of course, want to thank the Trades Council for bringing us all together, because that is the important thing, because as I always say, brothers and sisters, together we can win. Yeah.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you, everybody. I want to pay particular thanks to Jane for coming today and for speaking. It's really, really splendid words, really important message, speaking both to the past but also directly to the present. And it's particularly important because of the fact that Jane's battled such ill health in recent years. I just want to say a real heartfelt thanks and solidarity to you, Jane. And our second speaker, nonetheless important at this point as well, is to hear from John Dunn. John was a rebel Claycross councillor in the 1970s, a former striking miner and a representative of the Orgreave Truth and Justice campaign, an ongoing campaign that have won some victories and have more still to win. And we look forward to hearing what John's got to say just now. John, over to you.
Comrades, can I congratulate the organisers of this great event, and more so for resurrecting a long forgotten part of our history. We're taught in schools, we're taught via the media that our history belonged to the rich and the elite, that we got certain crumbs off a table because they gave it to us, when the reality is, like these brave comrades we commemorate, is we have only gained anything by fighting for it. And even if you don't win, the very fact that you fight is an inspiration.
Yes.
And just as an aside, I'm obviously from Claycross. I moved up here about 8 years ago into Yorkshire. Missionary work, I refer to it as. So far I've failed miserably. But seeing this horrendous machine, this implement of murder, reminds me of a struggle not far from Claycross. Another long forgotten one, the Pentridge Marchers. They were simple people who worked handlooms, agricultural workers, who were codded on that there was going to be a massive siege of Parliament. Unfortunately, like every bit of our movement, they had a spy in their midst, and they only got a few miles towards the Nottinghamshire border when they were captured. They were sentenced to be gibbeted, hung, drawn and quartered. Now that's a bit of overkill, literally. And their bodies put on display to put fear into communities. Fortunately, the Prince Regent, whoever he was a compassionate person, and he commuted that sentence. He wrote out the hung, drawn and quartered bit, so they only had to be gibbeted and put on public display. That's what our masters were like, and if they could, they'd do this to us today. And I am honoured to represent the Augury Truth and Justice campaign, because there are so many similarities between the struggle of our forefathers in 1842. Not the least significant that they raised the demand in that great strike for a national mine workers union, something I had the pleasure of being a member for 19 years and serving as a branch official at 2 different pits. So it took a long time for that to come around, but those people had the foresight to see that only collective action could win. And that's the lesson we have to learn. It would be very easy, even looking at the massive disputes as our movement rises through its slumbers, it'd be very easy to look at the coming fuel bills, the cost of living crisis, and get dispirited. But comrades, as I say, they've not gibbeted us yet. Instead, they'll starve us and freeze us. And it's up to us to take inspiration from comrades like this. The fact that they fought means that what few benefits, what few freedoms we enjoy is because people like these fought. And the dispute that I was involved in, the great strike of 84, 85, the disputes we're seeing now aren't isolated things. They are part of the very same ongoing struggle. And comrades, I'll finish on this. The best way we can remember these brave comrades, the best way we can honour their memories is to continue that fight. But more importantly, comrades, let's make damn sure that next time we win. Solidarity.
Wonderful, inspiring words, John. Thank you very much. It was not far from here. I think over near where the tower blocks are over there was the Oddfellows Hall in the 19th century. That's where the mine workers, 800 of them from around the region, came to Halifax and proclaimed, as John said for the first time, a national mine workers union. Mine workers led the strike in 1842. So it's a real honour and a pleasure and a privilege to have John speak to us so powerfully today. And we're here as well, of course, to remember, as John said, the violence done to the lives of working people. I'd like to call us all now to a minute's silence to remember those taken by the gibbet, but not only by the gibbet, by the violence of those in positions of power against working people throughout history. So, comrades, if I could ask, please, brothers and sisters, that we take 1 minute to just pause silently and reflect on what it was that those in 1842 were struggling against. Okay, welcome, friends, brothers, sisters, comrades, to this very special event. It's an honour to have so many people here. It's a real pleasure to see this space so full, and it's been an honour to walk with you all through the centre of Halifax. My name's Dan Whittle. I'm chair of Calderdale Trades Council, and today, momentarily, we'll be unveiling behind me a commemorative plaque to those who lost their lives in the Great Strike of 1842. In a moment, we'll have a roster of speakers before that. We've got a really impressive lineup of people who are going to speak really briefly about the events from a variety of different perspectives. But I want to start, first of all, by just noticing a couple of important points. First, this is a real community collaboration. It's been put on by the Trades Council in collaboration with a variety of other organisations, not least amongst which is the Industrial Museum behind us, who've kindly accepted the idea of having the plaque on the outside of their building, who held a public meeting here and hosted that meeting a few weeks ago, and who've done really important work supporting this project throughout the way. So thank you very much to everybody from the museum. Thanks also to the Friends of Lister Lane, who hosted us at their fine cemetery in the Park Ward area of Halifax just this morning. If you haven't been there, if you weren't there for that section of the day, I'd really encourage you to go. They have 9 Chartist gravestones, or 9 known Chartist gravestones there. They have a new commemorative plaque and information board, that we've unveiled there this morning, and it's a really important historic location in this town. So thanks again to the Friends of Lister Lane Cemetery. Thanks also to the very many trade union branches who've donated funds to enable today to go ahead. Again, this has been a real regional effort from not just Halifax trade union branches, but many beyond. There's been a really important and impressive turnout from the labour movement today, and it's wonderful to have comrades from a variety of trade unions and trades councils with us today. But it's also important to note the financial support that's gone into this, without which today just wouldn't be happening. So thanks very much in solidarity to all those trade unionists and all those branches for their support. It's important to acknowledge the work of Michael Ainsworth and the Greyston Unity Pub, and also the staff and Chris Milton in particular at Eagles Crag Brewery, as well as Chris's daughter Laura, who's done a lot of the graphic design work for many of the leaflets, information things, and social media posts that have been out about today's event. So thanks very much to everybody involved in that, and I hope you'll join us from 2 p.m. at the Greyston Unity for a music event, and also to sample Eagles Crag's very, very fine new beer, Great Strike. So it might be a bit live, keep our eyes peeled for that one going in a moment. See if it comes from me again. Where was I? Great. Important other people to note. We will hear from Catherine Howe in a little while. She will be here and she will be unveiling the plaque behind me. But it's really important to acknowledge that without Catherine, today would not be happening. It's Catherine's book, Halifax 1842, that has been crucial to uncovering what was until then a largely little known history. Others before her had done important work, foremost amongst which Dorothy Thompson, the historian who lived, of course, in Halifax and whose significant contribution to Chartist histories should be acknowledged. But it's Catherine's book, first and foremost, that has done the legwork and the historical archival retrieval that has enabled us to put on today's event. So a real big thanks to Catherine and to the publishers of that book for the work that's gone into it. That book will be on sale at the Greyston Unity. We have a small number of copies of it, so if you haven't seen it yet, do pick up a copy when you're there. Thanks significantly to Catherine for her research. And of course, it's also important to acknowledge the work of people in Calderdale Trades Council, many of whom have supported, done lots of work on designing leaflets, distributing leaflets, working on publicity, not least amongst which should be mentioned Nigel, who can't be here today, Pete and Kevin, who've put significant work into this, and especially Mark Metcalf, friend of Catherine, who has kind of led on this idea right from the off, who's organised it and pushed for it, and who's held a lot of meetings in local trade union branches. Thanks very much to Mark and to everybody at the Trades Council for their work in this. Right, enough from me. I think we want to get into the meat and drink of this, don't we? We want to hear about why we're here and think about what it is we're actually commemorating. So we're going to go through a series of speakers. First of all, I'd like to call up Matthew Roberts. Matthew's a historian of Chartism based at Sheffield Hallam University and has supported throughout this project. He came to the very earliest public meetings and he's helped and supported and provided research assistance all the way through, including just this morning when he published a wonderful documentary list of Halifax Chartist banners that is now online and available, and which I'm sure he might make mention of over the next few minutes. Matthew, over to you.
Right, good afternoon everybody. It really is great to be here today, and I can't think of a more fitting place for us to be, including outside, for reasons I'll come on to in a moment. My first thought today, in thinking about what I would say, is what would the Chartists have made of this? And I think they would be immensely proud, and also slightly surprised in a good way. Heritage, putting up plaques, putting up statues, commemorating great leaders, was central to Chartism. And the movement drew a lot of strength from heroes, both local, national and international. And the amount of time and resources, I think, that a movement like Chartism put into what we call these days its heritage politics, shows just how serious they took this. And it wasn't just a movement for democracy and political reform. It was also about saying, we working people, we have our own heroes. We have our own canon of literature. We have our own heritage. But of course, they found it very difficult to get that marked on the civic landscape. Chartists usually have to resort to what one historian's called paper pantheons. So they produce pictures of their leaders, dead and alive, and put them in their homes or display them at meetings. And the main reason they couldn't get things like this was because the civic elites at the time denied them access to the public sphere. So Chartism, as well as being a battle for democracy, was also about the right for working people to leave their mark on the physical landscape of towns as well. So that's why I think they would be immensely proud. I think the Chartists, it would not surprise them, I think, that the campaign for this plaque and the memory has been a long, hard-fought one and led by dedicated volunteers. And I think that they would also be proud that the movement is being kept alive by the trade union movement, a movement that Chartists wanted to cooperate with but weren't always able to do so, in part because of conservative elements in the trade union with their no politics rule, but it also has to be said because sometimes the Chartist national leadership, at least, lacked a viable strategy for engaging the trade unions. But because Chartism was so much more than its national leadership, just like the Labour movement today, that leadership sometimes found events overtook them as the initiative passed to places like Halifax, and nowhere more so, of course, than in 1842, the year of the Great Strikes, when the rallying cry on the streets, not sure if I've seen it on the banners, but it was the Charter or no return to Labour. I think it would have also not surprised the Chartists that it didn't prove possible for us to process through the streets today. I'm not going to kind of get into the ins and outs of why that was, but yet again, I think their eyes would have rolled going, working people and their representatives being denied access to the public sphere, but not entirely. I mean, here we are. One of the ways in which the authorities tried to defeat Chartism, and this is my last point, and I've alluded to it already really, is by denying its members access to public space, such as permission to hold meetings in civic buildings. And of course, this is one of the reasons why the Chartists often met beyond urban jurisdictions at places like Blackstone Edge, which we heard about earlier on, and more famously and locally, of course, Skircup Moor, Skircup Green. This was also one of the reasons why, and I like this a lot, that they met in pubs, because this was one of the few spaces where, if the landlord was a friend, and many of them were in working class communities, sometimes for reasons of self-interest, they would allow Chartists to hold their meetings there. So in more ways than one, I think they will be hugely proud they finally secured what I hope is going to be a permanent lasting place in the public sphere of Halifax. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew. And it's important all the way through to remember the historic elements of this, as well as the contemporary resonances with our own politics and society at the minute. That history, of course, is part of what this building behind us stands for, Calderdale Industrial Museum. And so it's my great pleasure to invite Bernard Wadsworth to speak next. Bernard is the chair of the Calderdale Industrial Museum. Over to you, please, Bernard.
Thank you. I'm very glad that at the beginning you mentioned brief talks, because that's the only sort of talk I do, I'm afraid. So, welcome on behalf of the Industrial Museum. Welcome to the Industrial Museum, and welcome on behalf of SEMA. We're actually very pleased that we were able to offer you, if you like, a site that's reasonably prominent, not one that's going to be hidden away somewhere. And here we are. We are very pleased that we've been able to assist you with that, and so things can be moved forward. And hopefully, of course, there's a good regular footfall backwards and forwards up and down these stairs. So again, more people become aware. It's going to catch their eye. And I've always felt really that history is something to be studied and learnt from in order to not make the same mistakes again, which doesn't seem to happen very often, but this to me is the real purpose of history, is so that you can go forward and hopefully do it better. Say it's a fitting building because, yes, it's full of machines, and machines from the times immediately following 1840, and some from that time as well. So this is, I would say, a celebration of what happened afterwards in many respects. I think that's about as far as I can go with it, because I'm not greatly au fait with the historical side, as with a lot of the volunteers here, were the engineering side, the technical side, look after the machine side, and that's always our big priority, and then everything else joins in from that. So I'll finish my talk now. I'll just mention, because I can't miss an opportunity for a little commercial, that there are cold drinks and snacks available in our cafe. So enjoy if you want. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bernard. This building in many respects is living history. It's not history from the past, it's an archive of the things that have gone on in this town, and it's really important that we recognise that that history has never got one sole interpretation. Museums and museum spaces are spaces that present multiple different meanings and that people can have battles over. The dead are not just left to be, unfortunately. They are, and their legacies are fought over and argued over. And part of what's happening here with this plaque is hopefully shaping and changing and thinking more critically about what the 19th century, what the Industrial Revolution, and what the place of working people was in that history. And it's been really interesting and important having conversations with Bernard and others at the museum and having the public meeting here, thinking about the ways that we present the history of this town and whose voices get to speak and whose voices matter in that. Those of Ben Rushton and the other chartists that we heard about this morning at the cemetery are just as valuable and just as important as anybody else. And it's really important to be able to mark this event now with something a little bit different, giving voice to those histories. I'd like to invite up Kieron Higgins. Kieron Higgins, a local poet who's been commissioned by Michael Ainsworth at the Greyston Unity to write a special and new poem about the events of 1842 and the commemoration and so on. This is, I should know, I think, Kieron, am I right? This is the first time this will be heard in public? Excellent. So this is the first time this poem's been heard in public. So, Kieron, without further ado, over to you.
This one got a title because we're not very good with titles. It's just called the 1842 poem. An uproar was coming. The time was due for the great mining strike of 1842. After years of all unrest among the chartists and the lower classes, too many died by the hourglasses, battered and bruised, specifically children, who were sent to work against their will, to which they met their fate in the mill. But the people fought back. Enough is enough was the battle cry in this blinkered vision of slavery in which the young and old did die. They took to the streets, armed with weaponry, they were ready to fight. But what wasn't expected was the opposition in sight. The army had been brought in, and the strike was in full swing, armed with sabres and the horses they were sent to do their thing. But the people proved to be too strong at first, but their victory was hard fought. It was short and sweet, as many were arrested or killed in the street. But for today of all days, let us remember the people and the children who died, and those who fought for their rights on August 17th, 1842, to hopefully give their families a better future and live their lives anew. Thank you.
The Chartists, of course, were great lovers of song, of poetry, of music, and so I think they'd have really been honoured by the testimony that we've just heard from Kieron. That was a wonderful, wonderful new verse, and we hope to see it in print soon as well, Kieron, fingers crossed, and circulate it across the town. It should be far, far more known and will help in the endeavour that we hope will go on after today to get this history and this story better known. I can think of that as a wonderful teaching resource that can be used in classrooms, for example. It's a really, really important way to honour the history that we're here for, so thank you, Kieron. We now have some speakers who I think will bring this history alive for us in slightly different ways. We're going to move into a series of speakers who will speak to these concerns from trade union perspectives. Chartism, we've talked about as a Halifax movement, but we should be very aware that Chartism and the events of 1842 were not locally specific to this area. 32 counties, 500,000 workers participated in the Great Strike of 1842, and Chartism was nothing if not a diverse movement. Women led the protest marches, stood shoulder to shoulder with the cavalry on North Bridge in Halifax, and had branches up and down the valley. Todmorden in 1841, I think it was one of the most significant women's Chartist branches, for example. It was also a diverse movement in the sense that it included all comers. Chartism is famous for having William Cuffey in its ranks, a London-based Chartist of an African-Caribbean background who stood, as the press at the time called him, as the representative of the black man and his party. There was racism opposing Chartism at the time. Chartism, of course, also incorporated large numbers of Irish communities in the working class on these islands at the time as well. Chartists fought shoulder to shoulder and were leading parts of the Irish freedom struggle, and Chartists such as Ernest Jones, who stood for election in Halifax in 1847, were staunch anti-imperialists and internationalists. So it's a real pleasure to invite to the front here to begin our little section of trade unionists, Mohammed Taj, the first Asian president of the Trades Union Congress. So it's a real honour and a pleasure to welcome Mohammed from Bradford and to have him come and speak to us today.
Comrades, sisters and brothers, can I first of all say it really is wonderful to see so many people turn out today, because in Halifax, I've been to demonstrations in the past, but not many. You'll find that we've had more demonstrations in Bradford over the years, thanks to the National Front and the English Defence League, turning up every other weekend, ruining our weekends. So here today, the number of people who have actually turned out is brilliant. And I really want to thank the people behind this who've been organising it. And you know the history that exists just in a major part of a corridor where there's a very large Muslim Asian community living there. I spoke to at least 6, 7 people in the streets, and nobody's actually ever heard. One person, taxi driver, told me that he's lived there from 1978 up to now, and the cemetery actually looks out into from his bedroom into the cemetery. I didn't know, and he said he's going to make sure and actually go and visit and read the literature that exists already there. So therefore, thank you so much for the invitation to speak here, and thank you so much for organising. I tell you, the faces of some of the people I saw in the streets, I think they were fascinated. They've probably never seen this number of people turning up. And some of them actually were shouting, or one of them at least, said, "Get back to work." And I nearly said to them, you know, most of us are retired with our Saturday day off. And so therefore, I think it's important. Let me just take you back to comments I want to make. And I just want to make sure that my comments are brief because there's many other speakers. I got involved in the trade union movement the days back in the 60s. I worked for 4 or 5 years in textiles before I moved on buses. So I was a bus driver in Bradford for 43 years. And I regularly drove a bus into Halifax and out of Halifax. And of course, the same bus company actually operates out of here as well. So we spend many hours and days on picket lines in Halifax and in Bradford over the years. Let me say this to you, those people who say, get back to work, people love going on strikes. I was a negotiator in Bradford for 35 years out of my period as a trade union activist for 3 years. I tell you, I never ever wanted to go on strike, and none of my members ever wanted to go on strike. The reason they didn't is because we couldn't afford to, because our salaries and wages were so low. So therefore, it's always a last resort. And ASLEF and RMT are calling people out on strike. There is a damn good reason for that. When you take 4 billion out of the system, subsidy they've been providing, the government has, over the pandemic. Now, some people think the train companies are going to recover that money from the ridership to come back pre-pandemic. It's not going to happen. So therefore, help and support is going to be needed for a number of years to come until the ridership comes up. Some of you have probably read in the last 10 days or so. 1 million people, similar age to myself, 50 plus, they took early retirements because it wasn't worthwhile going to work anymore, because it actually was costing them more. Same reason I retired earlier in 63, because when I was going to work, actually it was costing me money. I was losing £30 a week. My wife, and I think, you know, our partners are a lot more wiser than men are. And she said to me, why the hell are you going to work when you're losing 30? Stay at home, eat lunches here, breakfast here, and we'll be better off by £30. So therefore, those 1 million people are no longer riding trains. They're not paying in taxes. It's going to be a problem. Some of you have read this morning, the government at the moment is paying £4 billion a month on servicing the debt charge to the nation. Because of interest rise and less number of people paying taxes, that's going to upload to £8 billion, from £4 to £8 billion per month. Now, I always say, when there are major problems like we had back when the NHS was created, and it was a bold move that was taken, those people who created the NHS. And I'm grateful to all those who have supported NHS like I do. It saved my father's life, and it saved my mother's life, my brothers and sisters, and mine, because all of us had TB. And there was no cure back in the early 60s, if you remember. So therefore, I'm actually very passionate about the NHS. I'm passionate about public services. And, you know, somebody said earlier on, the rich and the wealthy, those who can afford it, they can have to contribute more. And we see the two candidates being paraded by one of the main political parties. One of them definitely is going to be a prime minister. And I said to one of my friends, if one of them gets in power, I'm moving to Rwanda. Because some of these policies being articulated about tax cuts and everything, it's not going to happen. It's a pack of lies. Something radical, more money is going to have to be invested on trains. And I tell you, one of the things we're going to have to do something about is the crisis we have. Food prices are going through by 10%. It's projected they're going to go up to 20%. And I'm not even going to talk about the electricity and gas price. I know mine has gone up from 176 to 488 for a very small 2.5 bedroom house. Now, it's going to be impossible, people, actually. It's going to be eat or eat. Comrades, colleagues, I'm looking forward to hearing other speakers. I'm really grateful for this event being organized. And I tell you why, on my final note. Some of you remember the Jalaliwal Bagh massacre, which is referred to is the massacre that took place in 1919, where up to this day, they say there were 358 people to 1,500 plus killed. Who were they killed by? They were killed by the capitalist establishment. No one else. Same people actually shot some of our trade unionist colleagues here in other parts of the country. And I think it's important that we support those who are trying to keep that memory alive and stopping those who are trying to erase it. There's a group of people in UK and India who have actually set up committees, organizations together. They're keeping that going. Just like your venture here, you actually are trying to do that. So well done. And I say thank you from bottom of my heart for all the organizers who have been doing it without having to name all of you, because it's difficult when you turn up on a day and you actually get fascinated, see what you've done. Well done, and thank you.
This
was a fight about pay, first and foremost, that became joined to a political struggle for the Charter and for democratic rights, in just the way that trade unions and working people are fighting for pay and over other issues right now. And it's a real honour to have Dave here with us. Dave is Bradford and District Political Officer for the CWU Union and recently elected Halifax Rep as well. So Dave, without further ado, over to you.
Good afternoon. I'll roll this down because my memory's not. I've been a poster for almost 23 years now. I love my job. I enjoy providing excellent customer service to the great British public. However, since privatisation in 2013, I have witnessed with my own eyes the steady decline of this once proud institution that has been around for over 500 years. This has culminated with the recent news that Royal Mail have taken executive action over pay and also have serious intention of taking executive action regarding terms and conditions in the coming weeks. At the moment, as you are probably aware, the CWU has two separate ongoing industrial battles against Royal Mail. The first of which is a pay dispute. The union received a fantastic yes vote of 97.6%. A 2% pay rise was forced in without premium by Royal Mail, which is totally unacceptable for myself and the other 115,000 plus key workers who were fantastic during the pandemic, helping the business make record profits at a time when other big businesses were wondering if they would survive. The second ballot is over terms and conditions. Royal Mail want to take executive action and separate from GLS. This action will threaten the legally binding USO, Universal Service Obligation. Royal Mail want to essentially tear up our contracts to the huge detriment of us postal workers, just so they can line the pockets of the CEO and appease the billionaire shareholders. Here's some of the things I'm going to bring in. Change to working hours. Royal Mail want to adjust start times between 1 and 3 hours, varying in different delivery offices. For example, full-time staff currently start at 7 a.m. in our office, but the new proposed start time is 8:40 a.m, meaning our finish time moves from 2:50 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. This is totally unacceptable for thousands of members, especially those who have to collect their children at school pick-up times. Many of us will be forced to find another job which shouldn't have to. If these changes are implemented, the only reason the business wants to introduce this is for the sole benefit of its shareholders, not its staff and the general public. Sunday working. Royal Mail want to include Sundays as part of the normal working week shift pattern. This is the only day of the week many of our members get to spend quality time with their families. It's totally unacceptable. I understand parcels are important and the business needs to have change. But Sunday working should and could quite easily be dealt with on a voluntary basis. Sickness policy. Royal Mail are planning to amend the sickness policy to the huge detriment of the members. They want the second and third periods of sickness within a 12-month period to be changed to statutory sick pay. Being a postal delivery worker at times is very strenuous. We are currently expected to walk distances of 10 miles per day on average. A lot of members are extremely concerned about this as injuries do occur naturally for them doing a physically demanding job. Two-tier working system. Royal Mail want future new members of staff to be paid 13% less than the current new members, but also working longer hours than current staff. This is totally unacceptable and must not be allowed. This is all part of the deliberate act to force out long-serving members and recruit new staff on less wages to line the pockets of the shareholders and the senior management. GLS. As I mentioned earlier, Royal Mail want to separate from GLS, the European arm of the business which makes much more profit than Royal Mail. Royal Mail are giving away work to its competitors, which is unthinkable at a time when they claim to be losing £1 million a year. The USO is under serious threat and action must be taken from the government to save this great rich postal service. As you can see, all these changes are very much to the detriment of us key workers. The divide in this country between the rich and poor has never been so tragic. Why should CEOs and shareholders involved with business take millions of pounds out of companies across the entire UK when normal, hard-working people like me struggle to pay bills? Sorry, that's right. We worry that if our cars break down, it could leave some of us in financial ruin. Some of our members have to use food banks. These are working class people now either on or close to the poverty line. Something needs to change in this country. Action needs to be taken. There is no reason why earnings between CEO and a postal worker cannot be brought slightly closer. Royal Mail claimed to be losing millions, yet recently gave £400 million to shareholders, and last year made a profit of over £760 million. I'd just like to tell you when the strike dates are. The strike dates are the 26th and the 31st of this month. Maybe a 48-hour strike on the 8th and 9th of September. I'd really love to see you lot in there. This is the battle. We're fighting.
So speak with your posties, support your posties, and support Dave and his members as well. Thank you very much, Dave. Really important, really inspirational speech from trade unionists fighting the same fight as those trade unionists of 1842. We have two more trade union speakers before we move Catherine to unveil the plaque. So I'd like next, please, to call up David Williams, who's the Regional Secretary for the Fire Brigades Union. David, over to you.
Thanks, Dan. Firefighter, so I'm notorious. My blood sugars drop from about 10:30, so I'm well put outside my comfort zone, so bear with me. And I've passed too many ice cream shops to be focused on any sort of long-winded speech. So I'll just say a couple of things. Firstly, thanks to Dan, Mark and the Calderdale Trades Council for inviting us all here today to celebrate this fitting tribute to these what can only be described as martyrs, really. So thanks to those. I mean, much to my disgrace, I used to be the West Yorkshire Brigade Secretary and didn't have a clue about this struggle, 1842. And again, thanks to Calderdale's Trades Council, they invited the FBU up to talk about a particular issue 4 or 5 years ago. It might have been in celebration of the FBU's 100 years of being a union. I can't recall exactly. But Mark was there, and it's good to see he's still selling books because he actually sold me this one. So it's and it is a startling read, and there is a quote in there that I hope I'm not stealing any of Catherine's thunder here, but there is a quote in there that I want to talk on just before I finish. I will say that we were talking earlier, and we've been talking again today about food banks. It's become the norm now. We buy an extra tin of beans, we drop it in for a food bank at whichever supermarket you choose to shop at. And it's not, this shouldn't be a norm. This is outrageous. This is the 21st century in the 6th richest nation. And for the last 10 years, this government has led us to believe that don't worry about it. It's quite normal. Jacob Rees-Mogg once described it as uplifting. Uplifting to use a food bank. Disgraceful. And we are allowing these shylights to get away with that sort of stuff. Not only that, this year, believe it or not, local authorities are talking about warm banks. So if you're cold, don't worry about it. We've got a library open. It's not your local library. It's the one, 5 or 6 miles down the road, but that's still open. If you're cold, go down there. They'll make you welcome. They'll keep you warm. Scandalous, absolutely scandalous what this government is doing to this nation, and we need to hold them to account. So that brings me on to my final point, Dan. We have talked about history and how we should learn from it, and our adage is educate, agitate and organise. And we need to do that. We need to do that on an industrial level that we've never done before, or certainly not since 1842 anyway. We need to get those people out on the streets now and saying that enough is enough. I mean, it has been for most of us for the last 20 years. Under New Labour, it weren't exactly great when they were buying PFI buildings up and down the country and burdening hospitals with tons loads of debt that they're still paying off now. So we need to educate, and we need to organise on an industrial level. And I will just finish on this, Dan, if I may. And again, apologies, Catherine, you might have to amend your speech. But in a meeting, James Stansfield, now Halifax Liberal MP, sent a note to this meeting saying, "We can do nothing whatever worth doing here on this question of reform unless the working men to whom we wish to extend the franchise bestir themselves and enable us to help them to it." So let's get out there, folks. Let's get onto the streets. Let's say enough is enough. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, extremely important. Wonderful to hear from the Fire Brigade Union today, and really important to reflect on that historic legacy. That question of how Chartism gets remembered is at the centre of today's events. In my other capacity, I'm also president of the local National Education Union, and it's crucial to our education work to think about that question of how to educate appropriately around Chartism. Believe it or not, when Chartism comes up in classrooms, when Chartism comes up in the curriculum and in exams in particular, I've just been reminded, it's often framed in terms of how or why did Chartism fail? Was it a failure in 1842 to have 25,000 people out on the streets of Halifax fighting for pay, conditions and democratic reform? Is it a failure that we are here today remembering that legacy now? I don't think so. And I think we need to rethink everything about the way that we frame the questions and historical remembrances around Chartism and its legacies. Thanks very much for that reminder. Final trade union speaker for this afternoon, or this morning, sorry. I'd like to welcome, please, John Stewart, who is a representative of a trade union in a live and active conflict at the moment. I'd like to welcome, please, John Stewart from the RMT, who's going to speak about their dispute. Of course, as left train drivers are on strike today, and I'm sure John will give us a full and rounded story of their dispute at the moment.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start by paying my tribute to the Chartist movement and to those people 180 years ago that gathered together to fight. We're still fighting for today. That's the truth of the matter. I'll be honest, as a couple of others have said, I didn't really know a great deal about the Chartist movement, but I've done a little bit of homework. And what I would say is, in 1842, to be able to get 500,000 people out on the streets to protest against people taking their wages away, taking their livelihood away, and standing in front of soldiers that are there and did kill some of those people, I don't think that should ever be forgotten. I'll be quite honest with you, they'll not be forgotten in my mind going forward. Whilst I was doing that homework, the one thing that actually stood out for me was not a great deal has changed in all those years. It's followed us through the years since then. The tactics that were used by those people are being used still today in a different format, but nevertheless still being used. And I look at it and go back to the miners' strike in 84-85. We all know what happened at Orgreave. We all know that they allowed them to get into a situation at Orgreave where they could be attacked. And attacked by whom? By police forces and allegedly by members of Her Majesty's forces, the army, that were brought out and that were put in policemen's uniforms. So nothing's changed. We come up to today. And what happens today? They're not as brutal, that's all. All they do is, if they don't like what the trade unions are doing, we'll change the law to stop it. There's no different whatsoever to what happened to these fantastic people, but just in a different way. If they don't like what you're doing, they'll change the laws to stop it. and they're in the process of doing it now. They did it earlier when they brought the thresholds up in order to get a strike happening. They brought it up to a level that they thought was unachievable. Well, they've now had their asses tanned because there's plenty of unions today that have not just reached those thresholds, but have absolutely smashed them. So the answer is, let's go back to the lawmakers and we'll raise it yet again and try and make it impossible again. And you know what? We'll beat that as well. The RMT have tried to do what these people did 180 years ago, and that's try and get started the first general strike in memory of these people, or since these people. We have currently got 40,000 members out on strike within Network Rail and the train operating companies. And they're fighting for pretty much the same as these guys fought for in 1842. The government and the right-wing press will have you believe very, very different. They have got a group in charge that is run and having its strings pulled by the government, which is called the Rail Development Group. It should actually be called the Rail Destruction Group, because that's what they're doing to the railways. Their intent is to save money at every angle that they can. They're going to close 800 travel centres. Network Rail are the biggest company that's involved in this strike. They keep telling you they've had a pay offer of 6%. What they fail to tell you is that's spread out over 3 years. 2% to start with, and then unless you agree to all the changes that they want to bring through, you won't get the second part or the third part. And those changes that they want to bring to Network Rail are scary, absolutely scary. They want to cut 2,500 rail maintenance jobs, but still ask people to maintain the same amount of railway. They want to go back to something called cost-based maintenance, risk-based maintenance. The Cllr are in the title, guys. What it means is they'll look at the maintenance that needs doing. They'll look at the risk of an accident being caused by not doing that immediately. And if they believe that the cost outweighs the risk, then they'll leave it and do it. Well, I'm a long time serving railwayman. I started in 1969. I've seen what risk-based maintenance does. I'll take you back to the Hatfield incident where 4 people were killed. My partner stood over there filming this, should have been working on that train that day, and she broke her foot the night before and was unable, God forbid, to travel on that train. 4 people were killed. That was in 2000. You move on to 2002, and then you got another accident. 11 people killed at Potter's Bar, when a train ran through a set of points that had been examined only a week before. And the points split and the train overturned and went into the station. 11 people killed. That's what risk-based maintenance means. And this government is a party to allowing that to happen. Well, the RMT will not allow that to happen. As far as we're concerned, safety's first, foremost, for everybody, for your lives and your children's lives and everybody else's lives. And that what must come first. Yes, we've asked for a pay rise. We haven't been offered one as much as they tell you. But first and foremost, we said no involuntary or no voluntary, no enforced redundancies, no changes to terms and conditions. And yes, please, sir, can we have a pay rise as well? They're telling us it's not affordable, it can't be done. Pay rises put inflation up, and that's not going to happen. Well, I'm not a mathematician, but I can tell you this. I don't know many of my colleagues or many of the workforces that's had a pay rise for the last 3 years, and inflation has still bloody well gone up. So somebody's telling us lies. This fight is not a railway fight. This fight is everybody's fight. Everybody must now get together and decide enough is enough. We've seen the amount of people that is now balloting for industrial actions. When you've got nurses and doctors considering it, and you've got teachers considering it, something has got to change. Those people don't come out on strike for nothing. That's a vocation for those people. But it's happening, and it's happening now, and it's got to stop. And somebody said the TUC is looking at it. Well, I'll be controversial and tell you this. It is time for the TUC to get its finger out nationally. And when all these people are balloting for industrial action, let's do it together. Let's coordinate it so we can bring this country to its knees and this government, because this government is killing us all. Very, very slowly, it's strangling us all. And if we let it happen, we should be ashamed of ourselves. The railway have started it. I just hope everybody else is going to get together and complete it. And perhaps we should go back to the phraseology that I believe was used back in 1842, which was called the plug pull riots. Well, then it's time we pulled the plug on this Tory government, because they're shafting us good and proper. The time is for us all to get together, guys. The man on my shirt here, Bob Crow, I believe was one of the greatest trade union leaders I've ever worked with and ever been in a general secretary's position. He had lots of good sayings and phraseologies that he used. And my favourite I'm going to use now, and I apologise before I use it. Some of you might get offended with the language, but what Bob said is this: if one of us spits, we will do no good. But if we all spit together, we can drown the bastards. Clear your throats, people. It's time to clear your throats.
Fine words that wouldn't have looked out of place in 1842 and are essential for us all to listen to today. Unity and solidarity, absolutely, comrade. Wonderful words. Thanks very much for that, John. Without further ado, then, to hand over now to the unveiling of the plaque. I said it earlier on, I want to say it again. It really is absolutely, without doubt, that if it were not for Catherine Howe and for the research that she has done and the work that went into her book, Halifax 1842, this event wouldn't be taking place. The things that we've done leading up to this wouldn't have taken place. It's my great honour, it really is, to welcome Catherine to the front here, to say a few words and then to go on and unveil the plaque. Catherine Howe, everybody.
Thank you. I don't have a voice on me like Dan does. Can you all hear me? Okay.
Yeah, all right.
Oh,
Yeah.
great.
Good.
Well, I'm not going to make a speech. You'll probably be delighted to hear. It never occurred to me when I was researching and writing this that it would end up like this. So, you know, that's a wonderful result. I am very honoured to be here to unveil the plaque, which is a celebration of people who lived in Halifax 180 years ago and their endeavours to achieve parliamentary and industrial reform. It's also here to commemorate the people who lost their lives on 16th August 1842. There were a lot of people who were injured that day as well. And we do have a few names of those who were killed or injured. It is only a few, really, because so many of them were just never reported. And I would like to read out the names of those people who either died that day or as a result of that day, and the people who were badly injured. And they are Mason Crook, who was a delver from Boothtown. William Sutcliffe, who was also a delver. Jonathan Booth, a stonemason. Henry Walton. Henry Walton lived over in Skirkett. Samuel Crowther, said to be either a nail maker or a flag maker. John Holroyd, a mill worker. Samuel Bates, a weaver. John Brooke from Stainland. Sutton Briggs from Wheatley, who was dreadfully badly injured. And Charles Taylor, who lived in Charlestown. There were many more. So I'm just going to unveil this plaque. It's here in honor of these people. So I'm just going to do it, okay? That's the end for me. That's it.
Few words as well before we move on. A reminder, first of all, that the day doesn't quite end just yet. We will be gathering at the Greyston Unity pub on the other side of the town centre in their backyard. There will be music from 2 o'clock, and the Great Strike beer is on tap and ready to refresh those who wish to have a pint or a measure of that beer. Benjamin Rushton would have approved. As the Chartist strikers moved into town in 1842, they paused in a farmer's field, I think, for a glass of treacle beer. Is that the way it was described at the time, Catherine? So do please join us at the Greyston Unity. A note also about those who haven't been able to make it here but have sent solidarity notices and also financial contributions to support today. The Manchester Trades Council and Bolton Trades Council both were hoping to be here but have been prevented from getting here, unfortunately. So sincere thanks to them for their efforts and their support in this. And thanks again to everybody who's here. It's a real pleasure to see so many people out remembering this history. This history when 25,000 people, remember, gathered on the streets of Halifax in 1842 and met the greatest of violence. When they met that violence on North Bridge on either the 15th or 16th of August, one female protester walked up to the cavalry who were marching and standing opposite them on the bridge, blocking their path. And she said, she walked right up to one of the horses. It was reported in the Northern Star. And she said words to the effect of, "We've come here for bread, not for bayonets." And on that particular day, that's where the quote that's on the banner comes from. It's reported in the Chartist newspaper, the Northern Star. And on that particular day, so many massed against the cavalry that they forced their way through. And they did indeed pass. The bayonets were sheathed on that day. They were not sheathed later that afternoon on the 16th of August, when those who Catherine read out met their face. If you want to know more about some of them, Samuel Crowther in particular, do pop into the library just behind us. They have a small exhibition with extracts from newspapers from the time that include the story of what happened to Samuel Crowther. So do just pop into the main entranceway there, and thanks to those in Calderdale Library Services who put that on. Right, it's very warm. I think we need to get out of the sunshine for a little bit. Thanks very much to everybody that's come here. Unity, solidarity, thanks to the museum and to everybody else involved, and enjoy the rest of the day at the Greyston Museum.